Ready? Good morning. Want to take roll?
Commissioner Adero,
Here.
Commissioner Kasher, Commissioner Wasserman,
Here.
Commissioner Wynn,
Here.
Chair Remke.
Here. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Unfortunately, we're going to start with some sad news of the passing of Beth Garrett, a former commissioner. I didn't have the pleasure of actually working with her, but staff speaks very highly of her, and in fact, often says she was one of the best commissioners ever. So I know it's a big loss for the community, but Commissioner Wasserman was going to say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't want to really repeat a lot of what's been said about Beth Garrett by Cornell and by other colleagues and by University of Chicago Law School and Virginia and the other places that she left her mark. I just wanted to share a couple of things. As a first-year law student, I came to appreciate Beth Garrett's dynamic personality and tremendous intellect when she taught at the University of Chicago Law School. I would just want to share a couple of thoughts from my classmates. She was an energetic presence that inspired learning and excellence. She was an incredible scholar and an even better person. She was vibrant, brilliant, and kind. And it was and will always be one of the highlights of my career to very briefly come back and reconnect with her during the short overlap we had here on the commission. And I found myself once again the student. Luckily, I didn't have to bear that too long because she moved on to bigger and better things. But again, she was in that role as well. She was a teacher, tremendously kind, and as always, just an incredibly dynamic person, and she's going to be greatly missed.
Thanks for those words. Okay, so we'll get started. Is there any public comment for an item that is not on the agenda today? Okay, seeing none. First matter is approval of the commission minutes from February 2016. Do the commissioners have any comments or corrections? Is there a motion?
I move approval.
Second.
Commissioner Adero,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes,
This motion passes.
great. And then we will move to enforcement matters.
I'm a little short. Galena West, Enforcement Chief. Before we started the consent calendar, I just wanted to give an update, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We did receive disgorgement from the last commission meeting. You asked for an update if we received the disgorgement of the funds. And on March 2nd, we received
Can you just refer to the matter?
Sure. The matter was the Friends of Janet Wynn 2010 committee disgorging the funds of $13,300 that they had received through laundered means. And they voluntarily complied. They gave us the money in a cashier's check for the general fund on March 2nd. So just wanted to report back that that was successfully done amicably.
Thank you. Okay, so the consent calendar is items 3 through 28. And before we get started, do the commissioners want to remove any items from consent?
No, but I have a comment on one.
Right. Any removal? Okay,
None.
so then questions or comments from the commissioners. You wanted to start, Commissioner Wynn?
Sure. Thank you very much. So I don't want to remove this from consent necessarily, but on item 9, which is a default. You know how I feel about defaults. I'm always
Could have
kind of
predicted this one.
you never saw this one coming. But you didn't ask for the maximum fine. It seemed like a particularly egregious case, and I was just curious as to your thinking on that.
Certainly. Generally for defaults, if they don't comply at all, we ask for max fine. So one count where the statement was not filed, we are asking for 5,000. In the other count, they did comply after being contacted and they filed that statement. What was the problem is that they also didn't want to terminate their committee and they don't want to pay a fine. And so then they stopped participating in the process. So that's why it's come to default. And that's why the second count is for the max fine, whereas the first count is for 2,500. And then we're also, the reason that this came to our attention was the complaint was based on the independent expenditure report not being filed, which is also being charged at a higher amount. So this committee itself only raised and spent about $3,600 for this local campaign. They actually opposed everyone on the ballot, which isn't generally a good practice to be successful against everyone. But 3 out of 4 got elected, and the amount of money left in the committee was $400 and something. So we took all of that in consideration, the size of the campaign, and we hope to administratively terminate them after this fine is instituted.
Thank you very much. That I'm satisfied with that explanation. So thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments regarding consent items? I would just say overall, it's a very strong calendar and enforcement. Thank you, Ms. West. See that you and your team had some big cases here that I know took a lot of time, so thank you for everyone in enforcement for that.
Yes.
Any public comment on the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second. Commissioner Adaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Rumke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Great. And then, so the next item would be item 29 regarding the assignment of a case to an administrative law judge. Do the commissioners have any questions or comments on this? Because as you know, this is a no vote matter unless where there's an objection and we want to hear it on our own without it first going to an ALJ. So thank you. Do you want to state your name for the record? Come on, you've made it all the way up there. Thank you, Angela.
I guess Angela Brereton, Senior Commission Counsel.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll jump all the way to item 30 already, and that is regarding amending Regulation 18239 and what is being referred to as the ride-along exception. You could go ahead and maybe both of you can state your names first, please.
Heather Rowan, Senior Commission Counsel.
And Dave Bainbridge, Assistant Chief of Enforcement.
Okay, good morning, Heather.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. We're here to discuss Regulation 18239. We're just looking at subsection D today. So the Political Reform Act defines a lobbyist as any individual who receives $2,000 or more in a calendar month, or whose principal duties as an employee are to communicate directly with a qualifying official to influence legislative and administrative actions. The existing regulations, 18239, provides an exception known as the ride-along exception to what activity qualifies as direct communication, and therefore who qualifies as a lobbyist. This exception has been in the books in one form or another since the early days of the Act. For years, this exception was understood to mean that a lobbyist employer could hire a lobbyist, and the lobbyist could bring another person to a meeting without that person becoming a lobbyist. In fact, the Commission's manual on lobbying says that this is what the exception means. The concept is simple. We want the people making the decisions to have good, accurate information, and sometimes the advocate or lobbyist needs a person with expertise in an area to provide that information. But the language was open to interpretation. Even though the application had been understood to have one meaning, the language allowed for others. The proposed regulation ensures the exception has only one possible meaning. Exceptions in general are read narrowly. The proposed language in 18239 ensures that the policy behind the ride-along remains, but that the exception as applied is narrow and clear. The proposed language first clarifies that the accompanying person must be an employee of the lobbyist employer. And second, requires that the accompanying person participates in the meeting only as a subject matter expert regarding a legislative or administrative action at issue. Over the last month, staff has received comments and suggestions that have improved the language to eliminate any confusion or ambiguity, as well as examples of who the ride-along person often is in practice. Overall, the comments have been supportive. we're happy to answer questions and we ask for your approval.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners on this regulation? Okay.
I'd like to wait to hear a comment before I ask
Sure.
the questions. Thanks.
Okay, public comment on the regulation. We did receive a letter. Is there anyone here in support of that letter? Okay, well, that makes it easy. I don't want to overlook the issues, though, but of course it would be much easier to address them if someone were here. But I think that, Heather, you kind of addressed some of them about the language, and there were some changes from the IP meeting, in particular addressing that issue of subject matter expert of what. It's the legislative or administrative action at issue, not in general about the process. In particular, I think this is a really good regulation that's going to just provide clarification. I think even the letter, which the author's not here, comments about, oh, there's no ambiguity because you can look to our manual. I think the fact that you have to look to our manual to understand the regulation means perhaps there's some ambiguity in the regulation. So let's make it clear. And I think you guys did a really good job on drafting it. So thank you. Commissioner Wasserman, did you have anything?
Well, I was actually going to ask questions based on the letter, particularly the suggestion that the existing language is fine. It's just a matter of making sure that we're clear on what we mean by it, and that what the letter indicates is that the letter from, sorry, pardon me.
You're referring to Mr. Hilltech's
Mr.
letter?
Hill's letter,
Mhm.
yes. And one statement in there is that the limited exception currently does not apply to outside consultants hired by lobbyist employers. And just to be clear, what we're saying, well, what are we saying here about that statement?
I think that the ambiguity came in. Everybody has an understanding of what the language meant, but there was language in there that said that the individual that we're talking about, this ride-along person, could accompany a lobbyist hired by the individual or the lobbyist employer. So if a lobbyist employer engages as a consultant to have what would otherwise be direct communication, that consultant could hire a lobbyist and not become a lobbyist himself. Does that make sense? So the language in the regulation allowed for activity that most people didn't really understand was in the regulation. So to the extent that we're clarifying that and eliminating ambiguity, I'm not quite clear where Mr. Hilltech is would like us to go with that. The language is good. It's been here for a long time, but we want to make sure that it says what everyone thinks that it means.
I would say that we agree with that statement from Mr. Hilltech. This limited exception does not apply to outside consultants hired by lobbyist employers. Correct. The argument was the language was too broad. Some people could have argued that it did in fact apply to those people. We wanted to clarify, number one, that it did not. Number two, that these people have to be subject matter experts. Anything else? Is there a motion?
I move approval of the regulation.
Second.
Commissioner Adero,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
No.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Okay. And I just wanted to take a minute. I want to congratulate Heather Rowan. She is going to become an administrative law judge with the Office of Administrative Hearings. She's a senior litigator in our legal division. She's been with the commission for 9 years, and she's worked on significant cases like Doe v. Reed, and most recently, Board of Pilots and the Burgess matter. And she's got special expertise in placement agents, Section 1090, and behested payments. And we're all going to greatly miss her, but we're excited for her new opportunity at OAH.
It's a great opportunity. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, Heather. We will miss you. You've really been an important part of this commission for a long time, and congratulations and best wishes. Mhm.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Best wishes.
Okay, next is item 31, which is the legislative update. And we do have 24 bills that Phil Ong highlighted for us. I want to kind of take this in a section and go with the first 5 first, because those are where there are actual recommendations. And then we can move to the remaining ones if there are any other questions or comments. And maybe even we could hold off on a motion and, if possible, do a packet motion. We'll see how that goes. But let's talk about them one at a time,
Yeah,
starting with the first one.
Before we even start on the first one, could I just ask just a general question?
Sure.
So, Phil, I know you're fairly new in this position, but do members approach the FPPC before they put bills in generally? I mean, I know some members just have an idea and run with it, but is your phone ringing and they're saying, hey, we're thinking about doing something on the Political Reform Act, what do you think, or would you help us with it? Or is it a kind of purely reactive at this point?
Well, in the 43 days that I've been on the
Yeah.
job, and the 24 bills that are before you, except for the ones that were introduced last year, I received 2 phone calls for all of those bills.
Mhm.
So it's pretty rare.
Okay.
I'm hoping that my presence here will change that attitude,
Okay.
and that they will be more proactive in reaching out to us, or at least if I hear rumor of something, I'll reach out to them to let them know we'd like to see language.
But as soon as we see language, Phil is reaching out to them. And
Mhm.
I just want to make sure that that is perfectly clear on everything, and definitely on the bills where Phil is making recommendations. There has been extensive discussions to various portions of these bills. But okay, so
Thank you.
is that okay?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we'll just go, the first bill being AB 2250. Are there any questions from the commissioners regarding this bill and the support position? It's pretty straightforward, and Galena is also still here and can comment on enforcement's point of view, why this would be helpful if there are any questions.
No, that's good.
Okay. Is there any public comment on number 1?
May I just ask one more
Sure.
question? So we have not taken a position on this bill in the past, even though it's been in print for a year.
No, this one's,
2250, it was just introduced.
That's
This is
the wrong
Mr.
date.
Ridley
Thank
Thomas's
you.
bill.
Wrong date.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I thought it would have been in print a year, and I thought, okay.
There's a typo.
You had me
That's
in
right.
panic also.
There's a typo in the memo, just to clarify. So it's 2016.
Thank you very much. That was my only question. Thank you.
okay.
I'll make sure I sufficiently punish myself for that. So,
Spanking tunnels.
yes.
And then the second one is on the San Bernardino County enforcement, which we've heard some discussion about over the past year and the success we've had working with the county. And this is at their request as well. And do the commissioners have any questions? Is there someone here from San Bernardino?
Right.
Great. Good morning.
Good morning. Anthony Newman on behalf of the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors. We're in strong support. We just would love to lift the sunset of the bill so we could continue to with our current partnership with the FPPC.
Kind of plan for the future a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
May I
Sure.
ask a question of the witness, please? So this has been going for a couple of years, and
Correct.
the county thinks that it's working
Absolutely.
better to contract with us rather than
Absolutely.
try to, okay,
And there's a significant cost savings as well.
terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also just for the commission's knowledge, the original bill requires us to write a report to the legislature on the status of the agreement and how it's been going, which isn't due until next year, but we're writing it in the process of writing it right now so that can accompany, we can report out basically before this bill is heard going through the legislature. So we've been working with the county on that as well. So we'll be happy to provide a copy of that to all of you as well.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So, I think that this is a great idea, and I was very pleased to hear that the FPPC had entered into this arrangement with San Bernardino, but I'm wondering how many other counties might want us to do the same thing with their county, because now there's a successful track record with the county, and I'm wondering, just generally speaking, what that might look like if, 10 other counties came in and asked us to do this same arrangement with them.
Right. That was something that's been sort of discussed as my understanding is when the first bill was
Right.
going around.
Mhm.
We've sort of taken the position that it's up to the local jurisdiction. It's really their, they're the experts on the ground. If it's something that they're interested in pursuing, we'd be open to that. There was a bill last year that went through that would authorize the city of Stockton to enter into an agreement, but we haven't had any contact from that particular jurisdiction. So we are sort of in the position of we're open to it, but we believe that it really should be on the local level for them to decide. And so as of now, San Bernardino is the only jurisdiction we've entered into contract with, and so we sort of take it out on a case-by-case basis, I guess.
And because it is a contract, it is up to us. And at that point in time, we could look to our resources and whether that would also impact the price of the contract based on if we need to hire additional positions to make it happen. So we feel protected by the fact that it would be a mutually agreeable situation.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on AB 2558? Any public comment, other public comment? Okay. Number 3 was AB 700, the advertisement disclosure. And that is Phil's recommending a oppose unless amended position on that. Do the commissioners have any questions regarding that position or the bill itself? Commissioner Wasserman?
Yeah, is this the bill that the author sent us the public comment about asking us to defer the evaluation of this?
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to see if there's anyone who has anything else to say about it.
I just want to make a quick note on that. Again, as I started off by saying, Phil's doing a great job of reaching out and trying to communicate with people. But this issue and this bill precedes Phil's time here. And in fact, I had a couple meetings with people going back to 2014 on this concept when it was SB 52. I had another meeting in March 2015 on this bill with the author's office staff and the lobbyist when it was still a spot bill. And I was assured that they would share language with us before it went into print because we had concerns regarding the concept in implementation. That's always been our concern. Again, I think they're laudable goals that we're talking about here for greater disclosure. Our concern is, can we implement it and can we enforce it? And so that's always been our issue. Anyhow, that was back in March. We did not hear anything. We did not receive any language. June, staff reached out again to the author's office asking for language. We were assured we'd get it. We got nothing. August, we reached out, got nothing. This is while our understanding was they were working with other parties coming up with the language. And then we did not see language until it was in print in January of this year, 2016. So I say that because there's a long history, and I appreciate the author reaching out to us now, but we have been reaching out to the author's office for over a year now with little success. So I would hate to hang our hat on that promise that now is the time to step up and talk with us, because when Phil most recently was finally able to get a meeting after 6 weeks of trying, he was informed that they were not going to make any amendments.
And so the staff recommendation right now is oppose unless amended, which sort of puts a point on what you're saying. Is saying, this is where we've been and what we expect, and certainly we would see it differently if it came back. Is that basically what staff is presenting to us?
That is Commissioner Wasserman, and the letter that came in from the author's office inviting us to work with them is actually was a development that we didn't expect. But the last meeting we had with them, we at the end of the meeting, they said they think about amending it, but their political strategy was to not amend it at all in the Senate. And so the staff position alone got them to apparently adjust their strategy. And we believe that the staff recommendation will hold them to that commitment if approved by the commission.
Commissioner Wynn?
So when's the deadline for this bill to be out of policy committee? I mean,
Yeah, it was introduced last year. and it's now in second house.
So they
And
haven't-
so it has a couple of, or a few more months. My understanding is the Senate Elections Committee doesn't plan on hearing it until June. So we do have
Okay.
time to
Yeah,
work with
we
the
have time.
author's office, but we believe the staff recommendation, again, if adopted by the commission, will really hold their feet to the fire, because we think a strong position is needed to keep these authors and their sponsors committed to actually amending the bill, because they've shown a lack of communication in the past.
And again, just I think Phil's report just hit on some of the most basic concerns. I think after having more time to read this, knowing that we were told it wasn't going to be amended, so I started really looking into this. There are much greater, larger concerns than even addressed in the report. So I do think, again, I think some of the goals, like adding a third contributor to the list, or earmarking to get to the true source, or even adding general purpose committees to these requirements, are all really good goals. The problem is the way it is currently drafted, there is going to be greater confusion than there already is in this area, which is a fairly confusing area. And when people talk about the act and how hard it is to understand, this is often the first place they go to, is the advertisement disclosure requirements. So my concern is, we have a messy area, we're going to gut and amend it to make it messier. And on top of that, I could get into some of the detailed issues if any of the commissioners would like to hear it. But I think, again, we can try to work with the author's office, and hopefully they'll be open to our concerns.
I really appreciate the background on the communications that have been going back and forth. And I tend to think, we have limited avenues with which to express how we feel about these things. And this is the way we do it, primarily, and in its strongest form. So I'm pretty comfortable with that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, please, Commissioner Wynn.
Have we had a formal position up until this time?
It's kind of, as the history I just said, it was a spot bill until January of this year. And again, we were told it was language was coming, so we were waiting for that.
Right. So we have, this is the first time we're actually
Yes.
taking a position. I'm comfortable with your recommendation on that. So thank you.
Okay. Any public comment on AB 700? I will note, and the commissioners received, and it's out in the lobby as well, that we did, as of this morning, I'm going to give you the updated number of 4,707 identical emails expressing concern with our position and asking that we hold off. But again, we are open to changing our position once we understand that there's an open dialogue about the amendments.
Thank you for that.
Any other public comment than the 4,707 emails we received? Okay. Seeing, now let's go ahead and move to AB 1200, and that is the lobbying procurement contracts bill by Assemblyman Gordon. And staff recommendation is opposed. And again, I'll just say my brief history on this. I, as you all have heard, have been talking about this probably for about a year and raising my concerns here in the hearing about them, in particular, pretty detailed last month, and I'm prepared to discuss them again in detail at this month if necessary. But I also think that the staff's recommendation highlights some of those concerns. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Phil?
Well, you know, I have seen this bill for a year also, and you know, when you see a bill that proposes to establish reporting, disclosure, and lobbying requirements for anybody who attempts to influence governmental decisions, you think, oh, I'm for that bill, right? Because that's exactly what we're about. But I am persuaded that by your comments that maybe this bill isn't ready for prime time, just because even though, you know, it is about reporting and disclosure, I'm not convinced that the FPPC is the right jurisdiction for that kind of reporting. I would like, you know, to be assured that procurement process, you know, has all the bells and whistles and protections that we ought to have. But I'm persuaded that at this point, your bill is not, this bill is not quite ready to move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and support your recommendation of opposing. So
And I just want to extend on those thoughts for a second, because again, we have, and I completely agree, it's a very difficult position to ever come out as an agency that when something's claimed disclosure to say, wait a minute, pause, this isn't right for us. But I feel, as Commissioner Wynn said, that the issue here is we really aren't the right agency for this activity. As you all know, contracts and procurement in California is a highly regulated process. We just went through a procurement process, and Aaron can talk at length about that, that took almost 2 years to just get to the point of entering into a contract because of every step of the process, which you have to go through. And we have been in discussions with the Department of General Services, who oversee most of these, and getting some explanation about their detailed process of what does go on. And again, we can talk about that to the extent people would like to hear it. I think from my point of view, the issue is if there is a problem with that process, let's address that process over here in procurements with the Department of General Services and not create a separate, completely new system for procurements in our jurisdiction, because we are not procurement experts. We will have to become procurement experts, which is not, I think, the right use of our resources and time. So that's my biggest concern here. In addition to what I keep saying, I'd like to have a clear understanding of the identified problem, not just that we all think greater disclosure would be good, because in fact, as highlighted in the report, I don't think we're going to get any greater disclosure by having these individuals register as lobbyists, because as we all know, on the lobbyist form, there is no listing of contacts or who they talk to. It does say who they were paid by, but then it's just going to lead us one step back to lobbyist employers. Anyhow, complicated area. I don't think we're the right agency. Commissioners. Okay, is there any public comment on, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Wasserman, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to ask Mr. Ong about, where in this process we already have a place in what's going on in terms of decision making. And procurement as a sort of a governmental process still involves people making decisions in which they cannot have a conflict of interest, a material financial interest, etc. So to that extent, we have a sort of a small, limited and focused portion of this picture. And this proposal is asking us to expand this to, I'm trying to think of this, I'm trying to visualize, like in terms of a thought of how broadly into policy we would be under this sort of approach. Granted, there are a number of reasons why perhaps this particular bill isn't one that we want to support, but if this policy question is going to come back to us, it's something that I'd like perhaps we should continue to think about, because this bill has been around for some time, and we've certainly articulated different viewpoints about it. But it seems like someone is really saying that this is a policy that they want to pursue.
But can I ask Commissioner Wasserman, when you say this policy issue is something we should look back to, and I'm again been very open to that, what policy issue are you referring to? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to understand the scope of the issue.
That's exactly what I'm trying to do right now. Is understand, because we're talking about that this bill reflects a desire for us to venture very deeply into the labyrinth of procurement, and where at this point we are one of the safeguards.
We have conflicts of interest, obviously 1090 on contracting. There are, again, yes. I think the concern is, what I think you're talking about when you talk about broadening the scope, which is something I know staff keeps raising concerns about as well, is lobbying, as we understand it, and as under the Act, is really about influence in administrative or legislative action on a policy issue, rulemaking, obviously legislation and the like. This is on soliciting contracts, which is just a whole different world. And is that really what the FPPC was created to do?
And well, I think that's really kind of a question as to what is the FPPC going to do in the future, right? And I just
We're
think
going to
it's-
become
I
DGS.
no, I just no. Believe me, I'm not jumping up and down to say, hey, let's have mission creep. But it's just something to keep
Trying to create
watching.
a kingdom. I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, no.
Commissioner Wasserman, that the staff, or at least myself, we share that mission creep concern as well. We are an agency with limited resources, and we can't be the one-stop shop for all things disclosure and transparency for anytime anybody wants to speak to the state government. That being said, over the last year, even though I've only been here a couple of months, my understanding is staff has learned an enormous amount about the procurement process, but has barely scratched the surface of it. And the DGS staff has also learned a lot about the Political Reform Act, bless their hearts. And and so we've had a lot of contact with them, trying to understand how do we fit this square peg into a round hole. And that's kind of the scenario that this bill puts
And I
us
would
in.
just encourage that process just to continue, because I think that's very valuable. We've always been talking about the educational function of the FPPC, and certainly if we have and folks turn to us for expertise in this specialized area, that communication should just continue to make it better, because it's, I mean, where at the administrative and at the legislative level, the determination of where the allocation of funds and priorities at a state level or whichever level is tremendous, but there's a tremendous concern as to what happens downstream. And even if that role is not something that we should take on or will take on, I think getting back to the folks who are involved in that and making sure they understand what role we do have and how to best educate and get compliance, and of course about enforcement as well. I think that's a very good process to continue it. But that doesn't mean I disagree with the position that I think we're going to be taking.
I think
Commissioner,
it's worth highlighting, like you both have said, is that we do have a role to play in terms of conflicts of interest. As the chair mentioned, Government Code Section 1090, there's the prohibition or limits on gifts. We believe that we are obviously enforcing the parts of the act and Government Code Section 1090 that would help to ensure the integrity of public contracting. So, we, to the extent that is our jurisdiction and our role, we feel very strongly and will always be participating in that to ensure that public funds are spent, wisely without conflicts of interest and all of those things. So obviously we remain fully committed to that. But for the reasons articulated in the memo and sort of part of this discussion, we feel that if there is a problem with procurement, that is better addressed somewhere else.
Commissioner Odero?
And I just have a quick question. What does DGS say about this?
Well, we can't really speak on behalf of DGS.
No, but
I
have
don't
we
think they've
asked? I mean, I thought you said that we had been in communication with them.
Right.
And I just want to say, I do see Assemblymember Gordon in the back, and I do want him to come up and have a chance to respond. So maybe it would be a good time soon. And maybe he's heard from DGS and or has had contact with them directly, and he can let us know if they have a position or concerns or comments on this. But go ahead, Phil.
Right. Commissioner Darrow, as I was saying, the DGS staff is still trying to absorb also the Political Reform Act, and how the limit that's put into the bill is a $250,000 limit, which would make sense in other contexts of the Political Reform Act, but in the DGS kind of procurement world, they've expressed some concern as sometimes you don't even know what the price of the contract will be until some of this quote unquote influence has already begun. When companies are making presentations and trying to investigate what the goal and the scope of the contract is, throughout all that, they don't know the cost of the contract, and so they are trying to draw a line somewhere of when this process begins, and that's just one of I think of several concerns that they sent us.
Okay, Assemblymember Gordon, would you like to start? Welcome. Thank you for showing up this morning.
Thank you, and good morning. I am Rich Gordon, member of the California State Assembly and the author of AB 1200. And I'm here today to respond to some of the comments in the staff report and perhaps answer some questions. Let me begin by saying your analysis suggests that the objectives of the bill should be clearly articulated to measure its effectiveness. So let me be clear about why I'm doing this bill. It's for the same reason that I have worked with this commission closely on several bills during my tenure in the legislature. Together, we worked on AB 481 in 2012, AB 1914 in 2013, AB 800 in 2014, and last year, AB 594. We worked on those bills together because I believe in transparency. I believe in this commission, and I think you should be commended for your track record. I have actually faith in the commission to look out for the public as it has time and time again. So why this particular bill? The state of California authorized over $11 billion in procurement contracts in 2014. In light of this substantial spending, the public should have the ability to see who, if anyone, is attempting to influence the procurement process and the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. As you're well aware, the California voters enacted the Political Reform Act in part to ensure that state and local government serves the needs and responds to the wishes of the citizens, and that we perform our duties in an impartial manner. To serve these goals, the Political Reform Act requires lobbying firms and parties employing lobbying firms to report their legislative and regulatory activities. Lobbying on procurement contracts does not presently fall under the purview of the Political Reform Act. I'll admit that. So while there is perhaps not a specific immediate scandal to cite, there have been several articles and discussions regarding how some companies engage in this process and continue to get work without anyone questioning their performance. Let me give you an example. CAL FIRE has a fleet of helicopters. Those helicopters were all procured following the Vietnam War. They were surplus. Everyone knows that there are no more parts for those helicopters and that CAL FIRE will eventually be replacing them. Lobbying firms in this town have been in touch with members of the legislature, with CAL FIRE for over 3 years, discussing what should be the form and shape of the new helicopter. What would it look like? What would be its components? There's yet no formal bid process, but the lobbying has already begun, which would have some ability to influence the way that contract might look.
Can you help me just understand that point a little bit? Because again, I'm first of all, you said that lobbyist and lobbying firms. So you're referencing a whole different category of individuals. You're referencing people who are already registered lobbyists.
Correct.
So registered lobbyists do disclose who's paying them. And I don't know why they'd be at the legislature regarding a contract for helicopters.
Well, partially because at some point the legislature will have to authorize funds to CAL FIRE to start the procurement process. So there's an authorization and appropriation process. Individuals and firms who, lobbying firms, may be registered, but they do not have to report any income that they receive from any firm if the activity that they are engaging in is attempting to influence a procurement contract. If they're attempting to influence policy, regulation, that income has to be reported.
So is it the communication between these individuals and members of the legislature that you're concerned about? Because in at least the early analysis from the McGeorge Law students who I understand crafted this, they were talking about communications between these individuals and agency officials. So are we concerned about communications between individuals influencing the legislature?
No, because that component of that activity would be reportable. The component that's not reportable currently is if they are attempting to influence agency.
Right, but that's where we get to the DGS and the procurement process, which I know you understand, and I know you understand how highly regulated it is, including competitive bidding, bid advertising, conflict of interest rules apply, as we've talked about, bidders' right to review solicitations, the protest process, public disclosure of contracts awards, including the state contract and procurement registration system, skippers as they like to call it, which lists the contracts. I just feel that area already has so many of the elements and steps which concern is being raised about, that we should look to that and say, for example, since we already have a reporting system regarding public contracts, should part of that system be to list who contacted the agency official before the contract was awarded? For example, your bill, as I think you know, came directly from New York's law. But the part that's missing, because New York's law is much more complicated, it says this is procurement activity, but the agency officials must keep a list of who they've met with when this activity is occurring. That list that the agency officials keep is then subject to public disclosure. So that's a really pretty easy way to track who's contacting officials. And that's, I think, how you would easily get at what I think you're trying to get at. Whereas having these people register as lobbyists, especially under the current system and our limitations with our forms, we're never going to be able to trace back who talked to whom regarding which contract. It's just not possible that way. And especially if we're talking about opening the door to having an additional 2,000 to 3,000 people registered.
Well, let me, first of all, make a couple of comments. One, you're correct. There is a fairly standard procurement contract, a set of procedures that our state agencies go through when they seek to procure goods or services. That process kicks in once the contract, once there's a request for proposal or a request for bid.
Mm-hmm.
What happens before that?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Who knows what influence is being peddled? Who's trying to attempt to influence even the way the contract is being written?
Well, that's why I'm proposing that perhaps we should look to New York's law, which your bill is fashioned after, but only portion of it. And I think the key portion is missing, which says exactly that. Those initial contacts, the agency official, we place it on them, is responsible for keeping a list, which is then subject to public disclosure.
And Commissioner, I wouldn't not necessarily be opposed to bringing that as a separate bill.
But in the meantime, what are we going to get out of this bill?
Well, I think what we get out of this bill is the following. First of all, let me be clear. Because of your requests, we took some amendments on this bill to modify who has to report.
I just want to clarify. I think there was miscommunication because I think you're going to say it's about the in-house versus the contracting employees. And as far as I'm aware, that was never at the executive level request. I didn't request it. Aaron Pett didn't request it. I think there was a miscommunication. And the point was, if you want to get this disclosure from people who are already registered lobbyists, and that was our earlier discussion, those people, if that's who we're looking at, the point was then just have registered lobbyists add this to what they must disclose, as opposed to creating a whole new threshold. That was our only suggestion. It was a suggestion, but that's not what this bill does.
No, that's what the bill does at this point.
No, because this bill isn't about people who are already registered. It's saying that if you meet the threshold and you're paid for this type of activity. So it is new people. We're going to be going after people who are not currently registered.
The vast majority of folks that are going to be reporting under this law are folks who are currently registered.
And how do we know that? Because again, I think DGS told us last year there were 5,600 contracts over 250,000.
I think if you, I'd refer you to websites of lobbying firms in town who advertise that this is something they do. Firms in Sacramento are telling us that in advertising, sign up with us. So these are folks who are already doing this work for the most part. And I think by eliminating the in-house folk, requiring folks to meet the standards for lobbying registration, we've limited this in a way that the folks who currently register will be the vast majority. And those folks will simply be adding the fact that they have received funds to attempt to influence a contract.
Well, I think we can respectfully disagree
Okay.
who this targets and who is the potential added list to it.
let me just make a couple of the comments, and that would be that you've had some discussion about the fact that this bill might insert the commission into the procurement process, and I would respectfully disagree on that point. What we are asking you, what this bill asks you to do, is what you already do. Not get involved in the procurement contract, not understand what's going on in the world of the agency, but simply be the place where registered lobbyists report their lobbying activity. So we're asking you to do what you do, not something new, not inserting you into the procurement process. One final note would be that there's been some concern expressed in the staff report that the lobbying disclosure would, that the bill does not clarify how the disclosure would be incorporated into existing forms filed electronically with the Secretary of State. And let me clarify that throughout the process of this bill, my staff's been in regular contact with the Secretary of State's office. I would note that the Secretary of State has raised no concerns with this issue. And in fact, the Secretary of State supports this bill. DGS has taken no position on this bill.
Have you had any concerns raised by DGS with your office?
We've had discussions with them. We've not had any direct immediate concerns raised by them. So I understand your staff recommendation. I understand the conversation you've had. I would simply ask that you not take action and that you abstain on this matter.
Okay, any other, thank you, sir.
I have questions.
Oh, sure.
I have questions.
Questions for the Assemblyman?
So, yes. Have you had any concerns, not just direct immediate concerns? Have you had any concerns expressed by DGS?
But DGS, we had conversations with them about the procurement process and how this would fit within the process. As we've tried to explain to DGS that, you know, we're not in any way, shape, or form trying to interfere with their process. Candidly, I think we've got a pretty good process in the state once the bid is put out. So we've not had any further contact with DGS in that matter.
Okay, and so going to that issue of once the bid is put out, this then goes to the earlier discussion of it's at that point that we know we've crossed the 250,000 threshold, right?
Correct.
So how do we deal with this before? I mean, obviously, a firefighting helicopter, I would guess, is more than $250,000, but not everything is going to be like that, right? So at what point is this triggered? How I share that concern. How is this, when is this triggered? How?
Well, it's triggered by the contract entered into with a registered lobbyist.
So it would be back reporting. So for example, your firefighter example, you said there's been years of contacts with members trying to influence what will ultimately be the scope of the contract. So I now am going to put on my report 2 years later that I had contacts with members 2 years ago regarding this contract that was now entered into.
No, I think that prudent lobbyists would report these contacts up front.
Any other questions?
Is there a possibility that there's going to be conflicting enforcement if you now have procurement as well as the FPPC?
I don't see that
Just
there'd be
concerned about
conflicting enforcement in any way, shape, or form. The enforcement here would be if someone had not registered under our procurement process with DGS and other state agencies. There could be action taken if there's a violation once that process is underway. But I don't think that they're necessarily in conflict.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment on AB 1200?
Yeah, Nicholas Heidorn with, excuse me, California Common Cause. We are in support of AB 1200. I won't duplicate what the Assemblyman has mentioned, but just from our perspective, we do view this as a disclosure and ethics bill more so than a procurement bill. There's an article about a $240 million education contract that came out some months ago where the media essentially found that there had been influence behind the scenes trying to get at that. In our view, this bill is trying to just
And how would
increase
this bill
disclosure.
address that issue? And how did the current procurement process not address that issue?
Well, I think as the assembly member mentioned, this happened before the procurement process actually started. And so the hope is they'd have to register that indeed they were lobbying the Department of Education.
But again, as we just discussed, they wouldn't know to register until after the fact when the contract's entered into and we know the price of the contract. I'm just really trying to make sure we all understand the distinction in the two processes and the limitations on what actually is disclosed and when it's disclosed on lobbying forms. Again, we're spending a lot of time this year on the area of lobbying, and our goal is to tighten that definition and the meaning of what a lobbyist does, and then increase disclosure on that information. So again, it's real concern to broaden that area, why we haven't even really captured what we're currently required to capture in the best way possible.
We share the chair's concern on Cal Access side, and we would like to see changes to further
It's
increase
not
the
just
form.
Cal Access, it's the role and definition of lobbying. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
May I ask a question of
Sure.
the speaker? Pardon me. So we already have situations where, folks participate in crafting the RFP, the RFQ, whatever it is, that they're not going to be able to be involved in the contracting and sort of shape something that they later do the work on. How does this really help us on top of those sorts of things?
I think the idea is mainly to just understand the pathways of influence. So understanding who has been registered to say, yeah, we're going to go out and lobby the Department of Education. Who is the employer behind us that's paying us to do this?
Right. And even if one agrees with the idea, I think the chair did mention it's sort of, if you want to find information about a specific entity and you're looking at particular types of procurement, if that information were available at the source entity where you're attempting to procure from, I mean, we may not disagree on it's one of those things where you don't support something if you're kind of, I get part of it, but part of it I'm not for. See what I'm saying?
No, I do. And I think the chair raised a good point about some ways that this type of bill could be improved. We view this as a start, not the end.
Thank you.
But I understand it is the end. All right. Any other public comment on AB 1200?
Madam Chair and members, I'm Trudy Schaefer, representing the League of Women Voters of California, and I've listened to what I do consider a dilemma. I want to just say that we have been supportive of the bill, and I hear the concerns, but I also hear the kind of concerns that the two speakers, the Assembly Member and Nicholas Idorn, just raised. I would at least hope that you would consider being neutral on the bill, and I would most definitely recommend that you consider the conversation you started about following up on because I believe there really is a need for more information available to the public, and it is incumbent on you to see how that can be made available to all of us.
Commissioner Wynn?
Thanks so much for being here, all of you. Thanks for your comments. As I started this conversation, I think all of us are in favor of disclosure, and all of us are in favor of transparency. We all want, a system that's open that the public can really engage in and see where the influence is. But I am troubled by this bill because it's too kind of compartmentalized. And if there are in fact lobbyists who have clients and they're, engaging in the, decision-making process, we're already hearing about that, right? Because they filed their forms and they tell us how much money they made from each client. So we know that already. So this is another layer, and I'm not sure we've gotten it right yet. But I do very much appreciate where you're coming from, because I think that's where I'm coming from. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment on AB 1200? Seeing none, we're going to jump to the last in the packet of 5 on recommendations, AB 1582, which also is a opposed position regarding the conflicts of interest. Commissioners, do you have any questions on this bill or the position? Is there any public comment on this bill? Okay. Phil, did you want to add anything other than what's in your report?
I would clarify one thing in our report since the public release of the staff memo, the author staff has clarified that their intent in the bill, even though it doesn't state it right now in the language, their intent is the bill is to have this information reported on a regular basis, not an activity-based reporting. As it's currently written in the bill, it is an activity-based reporting, but their intent is to amend it going forward to be an annual, just like every other Form 700. That doesn't remove the major concern that we have, which is it goes against essentially 40-year policy of the of the commission to exempt these academic decisions from conflicts of interest.
And not to list conflicts and then say they're not a conflict.
That's right. The disclosure without the disqualification.
And I would just throw into the mix anything regarding Form 700 this year. I think we have to take cautiously, because we are in the midst of designing our business plan for e-filing as we speak. So every change will delay that process. And so I think there's really a cost-benefit analysis in that as well. Okay, anything else? Any public comment? Did I ask that already on AB 1582? All right, so my suggestion was, and we started, that we have 5 recommendations from staff. We can make a motion to approve the 5 recommendations. If a commissioner is uncomfortable with that, they could pull one of the recommendations off that. But is there a motion to approve the recommendations as listed?
Yes, I move that we approve the 5 staff recommendations on the first 5 bills.
Excuse me, okay, 1 second. Excuse me, sir.
Yes, my name is Craig Dunkerley. I'm here on behalf of California Clean Money Campaign. Trent Lang was planning to be here, but he's been detained. So with your indulgence, just a very brief comment regarding AB 700.
Sure.
Basically, I'm here representing the grassroots effort statewide. We've got thousands of volunteers out there who've been working on this for several years. As I understand from talking with Trent, there are concerns that you have. Our request would just be that we recognize your concerns, and we'd like a little more time to discuss that with your staff.
Were you here during our discussion of AB 700?
I was not.
Oh,
I
okay. I'm
was
sorry. So we did talk about it, and we want to work with staff, and we want to come to some conclusions that we can all agree on. It's just our concern that we haven't been at the table yet. And so I think the commissioners at this point still feel comfortable saying oppose unless amended. And if we can get it amended into a position we can support, which we are hoping we can, we would obviously change our position thereafter.
Okay, but it wouldn't be possible to be neutral for the time being until we've had a check, because our hearing isn't.
Again, I don't want to
June.
repeat our discussion, but
Okay.
it hasn't worked well for us up to this point.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so there was a motion to approve the 5 recommendations by staff. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Adaro,
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman,
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Chair Remke.
Yes.
This motion passes.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for your lengthy comments. And we really appreciate Assemblyman Gordon coming to share his thoughts and concerns as well. Now we have about 18 remaining bills. Do the commissioners have any questions for Phil on the remaining 18 bills? But I don't know if you do. And I think a lot of these at this point, we are neutral, tracking, working with the author's office to the extent we have concerns. Is that a fair statement?
That is. Sorry, I was doing a little touchdown dance over there. So.
Any questions from?
Yeah, just one very general question. I know that these are works in progress and you're going to be, spending at least the next month really kind of digging in. But do you see anything here that is just totally kind of got your head exploding that we, maybe should take an early position, or do you feel like we've got time to kind of, spend time on it?
I believe we have time.
Okay.
My head isn't exploding just yet.
Okay.
Do you want to ask me if mine is?
No, I know the answer to that one.
But at this time, there's nothing that is urgent that is worth bringing up. I mean, as it always is when we publicly notice these bills, there's a whole lot of change that happens between them. So we will do our best to keep you updated as these bills move.
And just to clarify or I guess I should say note for the record, for the supporters and the authors of any bills we took an opposed position on. If it's an issue of timing and we can get to a point where we agree, or at the very least we can go neutral, I would be open to calling an emergency meeting if that were necessary to take a vote to change our position. Just so we're aware that, we'll do what we can, and that's our goal, is to reach an agreement. Okay?
Thanks.
I have one question. This regards number 11, AB 2523. It says it's a spot bill for language that would require local jurisdictions to adopt contribution limits or to conform to the state's contribution limits. I'm just putting a little note on that one to watch that, because it was interesting. I happened to visit one of the cities in LA County on their city council meeting on the day they were taking up the issue of whether or not they were going to address whether or not they were going to have contribution limits, and the question of, well, if they did, how they would enforce them, etc. And I know I consulted with Ms. West about some follow-up, because by being in the audience, I guess I made myself available for questions. But one of the things that I tried to stress while I was there was that I was just there to observe, and this is a local decision. So I just want to keep my eye on things like this, which sort of would change that dynamic greatly. Thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Commissioner.
a very good comment. Okay, if there's nothing else on legislation, thank you, Phil. We have the executive staff reports, item 32. Did the commissioners have any questions for staff on the reports?
I don't have a question, but I did have a comment. And this is to Ms. West. I think your enforcement report is great and really shows how much work is being done within your unit. I really want to thank you, especially on the $50 annual fee cases where you really are resolving that, big, intake. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yes, enforcement's been working extra hard prepping for the election, trying to get the cases processed so we have time to do pre-election efforts. And next month, we hope to have an update on the annual fee to show you the 2014 case numbers from the referral we received in, I think it was May. So we'll be able to give you more update on information on that.
And I
Stay
see
tuned.
Chris Reynolds is here, and I just want to say thank you to the Secretary of State's office for working with us on the $50 referral fee. And I think we're moving it through and getting it cleaned up. So it's great work.
We are. We're working together to put together qualifications for the 2015 referral as well.
And just while Kalina's here, I would say you guys are doing a great job. And for those who haven't seen it yet, our 2015 annual report is on the website. And among other accomplishments by the entire staff you can see in that report, it includes the Enforcement Division beating its 2014 record on the number of cases it prosecuted for fines. So 2015 was actually a record year for us in that area.
Nice
And
job.
it's really great, in addition to all this work you had to add on to that with the $50 fee and the like. So great job.
Thank you.
Yes.
I wanted to commend actually each of the divisions. The role of the part-time commissioner. One of the things that end up doing a lot is simply referring people to the resources. They come up and they say, "Oh, how do we do this? Here's the web page. This is how you contact to get advice, to get an opinion, or to make a complaint." And I've had interaction with each of the divisions, and I really appreciate the professionalism that you brought to it. I wanted to highlight that I just watched the relatively new video for candidates and treasurers, local candidates and treasurers, and I thought it was a very good video. And I'm trying to get the word out to people to go take a look at that, because then they don't have to say, well, when there's going to be a training or when is there going to be a webinar. It's just there it is. Go ahead and do it. And then if you have questions, at the end it says, contact FPPC, and gives the information. So I'm very pleased that we have those things.
I would just add one of the things that we've been working on as an agency, because we all do work together as a team, is participation in the San Bernardino contract. We're going down in approximately 2 weeks to do their specific training and enforcement and legal, and we all are working together to do a presentation for them, and they'll be having their own webpage on our website as well, so that they can get personalized information regarding San Bernardino rules.
Great.
and again, the website is a much more useful tool in relation to what I was just talking about. Local contribution limits was able to then provide that jurisdiction with a link to our website, which shows all of these other jurisdictions that have adopted local contribution limits, so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can look at all these different examples of what's been going on, and they can call these people and find out how well theirs worked or didn't work. So it's a lot of great resources out there.
On behalf of staff, I appreciate that comment because we obviously worked very hard on the website, and we are continuing to evaluate it. And so, if anyone ever has comments or can't find something or it should be moved, we're open to those suggestions. And we're looking also at sort of the next step of how do we put sort of more usable data up. And so, if people have thoughts or comments on that as well, to the extent we're collecting all of this information on, let's say, behested payments, how can we better visualize that data to get it out to the public? And we also are always continually increasing and trying to improve our educational efforts. We're going to be putting up some more of the presentations on, as you mentioned, the candidate one is up, so that people can access it at any time when they have the time available. And our education staff is very active this year, since it is an election year, doing any number of presentations throughout the state as well. So.
Okay, if there are no more comments on the reports, those will be submitted, and I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Adaro?
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Commissioner Wynn?
Yes.
Chair Remke?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thanks again to everyone. Thank you.